I, of course, should start by saying that my book, Diplomatic Dimension of Maritime Challenges for India in the 21st Century, does not represent any official views whatsoever. These are in the nature of somewhat freewheeling, at places anecdotal, reflections of a former diplomat unburdened by constraints of office.
It's a different kind of an event, Mulleji, where we had the occasion of listening to Ambassador on his book, Diplomatic Dimensions of Maritime Challenges for India in the 21st Century. Share me something about the author. What do you know, and what might have prompted him to share all this wealth of knowledge?
Well, I think it's high time that India and Indian diplomats take a lead in talking on important issues. And maritime security is becoming increasingly important, not only from the core security aspects, but also other aspects which have not been considered traditionally as a part of maritime security. For example, the security of the littoral states, that is coastline states and countries. So how to manage that? New challenges like piracy, for example, like disasters, natural disasters, whether it is tsunami, whether it is accidents of the ships. The other things like the tensions that arise about individual countries' behavior or ambitions. So it's very important that we have a well-informed discourse on maritime security. And Ambassador Yogendra Kumar, who has been a member of the Indian Foreign Service, has written a fascinating book covering all these aspects from India's point of view. And we have had a very fascinating discussion here on this book. And along with that discussion, a number of other points that came up regarding various points of view, how countries are acting, issues like terrorism and other national issues of national interest. And it was rather vibrant discussion. I would like to thank Ambassador Yogendra Kumar. I'd like to thank ITV also.
I thank you for making such an interactive forum here on this important issue. And he talked about a lot of issues. I just want to seek your input on this one, where he mentioned about the changing scenario of the way wars are fought in today's world. He talked about state actors versus non-state actors, and we all, when look at this issue, are reminded of what happened in Mumbai, where these people came through water. Now, from that point of view, India's preparedness, do you think we are focusing on making some changes?
Well, I think India continues to review its security situation from time to time. It's an ongoing, affair, and eternal vigilance is the price of democracy.
New York is an incredible place, and right here at the consul's office, we got the opportunity of listening to wonderful, call it a discourse or enlightening speech from Ambassador Yogendra Kumar, referring to his book. And that raises a lot of stimulating questions, not only about the security, about the changed world, about the new set of challenges, and how climate also plays its role in the security concerns of a nation. I also have the pleasure of the presence of Amit Trivedi ji, who comes from Council on Foreign Relations. So when you heard him and coming from a wonderful knowledge base that you have, share with me how important you feel his book is and the subject that he has brought. It is not that much available in the public domain.
Well, when you hear the intellectual talk about the book he himself wrote, obviously all the research is done in a great manner. And the point which Ambassador Kumar touched on, it brought back a lot of good memories, that he literally focused how important maritime and Navy plays a role in any developing country and any already developed country. And having a strong naval power, having a a strong, maritime security is very, very important. And the points Ambassador touched on security were very important. We have a tendency of overlooking those, but we know that there are pirates, and that's all we limit ourselves to. But most of the war, if you look at these days, are fought from the sea, so that you do less damage, or the ground troop doesn't have to get involved with the latest and greatest missiles available at their hands. So I think all in all, I can't wait to read the book and give my opinion. But I'm delighted that I had an opportunity to meet with Ambassador and be a part of this intellectual discussion.
So I appreciate your response. And generally speaking, when we read about war, most of the movies that you have, or most of the fictional novels that are there, they either talk about Air Force or maybe the ground, but there is very little material available which is interesting and about maritime. So first of all, tell me, where did you get the idea that this is the subject on which I need to write in the form of a book?
Well, actually, thank you very much, first of all, giving this opportunity to speak to your viewers. Well, actually, the idea really came from a former senior colleague of mine, who was Vice Admiral in the Indian Navy. And he suggested that the National Maritime Foundation would be happy to sponsor a book by me on the diplomatic aspects of India's maritime challenges. And I accepted that offer. First, because the fact that I have some exposure to security issues, although a lot of my exposure has been more to the land-based security. Like I was ambassador in Tajikistan when at that time I used to handle Afghanistan affairs as well. That is when the Taliban were in Afghanistan. So I've seen the changes that have taken place there. So the point actually is that because of the fact I had that experience, I actually realized that there's a lot of scope for looking at the maritime security challenges for India for two reasons. One is that maritime challenges are both challenges as well as an opportunity. If you look at the land security, so to say, you find that the way the situation at the moment is on India's borders, the prospects for, let's say, economic prosperity along the land borders are limited. If you look at the Indian map, you'll realize what I'm talking about.
Let me bring your attention towards the point that you mentioned. You lament on the lack of adequate role of media on these issues. So what is it that keeps media away? And you're talking about Indian media, or you're talking about foreign media, and what would you say are your expectations?
Well, I think in one way even the present government realizes that the media actually has been deficient for a whole lot of structural and policy reasons. And I bring in here both the fact the state media actually has not risen up to the plate, so to say, to actually expand its presence in even our neighboring region, where the interest in India is huge. I mean, I gave examples whether it is our neighboring countries, even Pakistan or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh or Afghanistan, Central Asia, certain these countries, Middle East, Africa. There's a huge, vacuum, a huge need for information about India. That information is not not provided by our state media. Our private media also, I feel, does not have that kind of a horizon, the vision that they should actually not just try to cater to the diaspora needs, which are important, they should be, but that they should make an attempt to enter into the mainstream discourse of these countries. I mean, for example, you take example, CNN, BBC, all these channels are seen not just by, let's say, Americans in a particular country, but everybody. Or the BBC, not by the Englishmen living there, but by everybody. When there is so much of interest in India today, why is it that even our private media is not able to tap into that opportunity and potential? That is something which I actually raised in this book, and I think it requires not only a bit of change of thinking on the part of the various agencies, but even perhaps a little bit of a more vigorous thinking on the part of the government to provide the right kind of incentive and the policy framework for the state and non-state media actually to enter the mainstream discourse in many of these countries, and I would say that means a lot of countries where there's interest in India.
Now let's talk a little bit about current Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision and his emphasis on making India strong from this point of view that we are talking about through your book.
Well, I think the Prime Minister, of course, has a very strong and a very, I would say, vigorous policy to defend our national security interests, and that you would see happening in the course of his diplomacy, whether it is towards Pakistan or Afghanistan or China or Central Asia or the Gulf region where he has been recently, or the ASEAN. So actually, in one way, the present Prime Minister has been quite active in seeing that in the international arena, which are the trends, which are the threads of our interests which can actually be pursued by a very active policy. And when I quoted from his speech, that was particularly relevant for the Indian Ocean region, because actually it fits into my narrative that today, if the Indian Ocean is still a largely peaceful body of water, how can we take the effort, the policy initiatives to see that it remains that way and doesn't get sucked into the vortex of the tensions which are growing all around it.
So now, since we are in the middle of a very volatile world situation with respect to the rise of ISIS, and there are potential threats for each and every country anywhere, European countries, America, and of course India is also not totally safe. If you look at the genesis of ISIS and its rise, do you see somewhere failure on the part of nations like America or some European countries to foresee and maybe lack of their intelligence capability? That is one. Another thing is, as a layman, I find it difficult that even in Pakistan, in the case of Al-Qaeda or Taliban or now this ISIS, that in the zone of a nation which is run by a government, there could be so many people with such weaponry and collective motivation to hurt others. So on these two issues, with your experience, what would you say? Maybe you want to add about the potential future that we are likely to see.
Potential future where?
In terms of fight against ISIS.
Well, I think this is a very complex issue, and I must say that in my book I do talk about that. What the situation today that you have, in a way, is a conflation or it's a continuum of security situations in a particular country and the overall security situation, because they all come together and they in a way feed upon each other, they aggravate the situation. So for example, if you have an unstable state, it is very likely two things will happen. One is the society is likely to be more fragmented. The other thing is that people are likely to be more angry, and therefore it is inevitable they'll be attracted towards more violent, aggressive kind of ideologies, because the overall political or ideological framework, which I mentioned in my book when I go to the examples from our own national experience pre-independence and how we were able to achieve that political transformation in a most non-disruptive and a very inclusive and a very ennobling way, which actually has served us well even today. So my point is that when there is a kind of a social fragmentation, when there's a political collapse, it is inevitable that you will find a lot of violent ideologies emerging in those places. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is how are these ideologies able to spread? Now that depends on two things. One is, I would say, the conditions there. Are you getting the weapons easily? That's first point. Are you getting people to getting people to train in the use of those weapons? That's the other thing. The third thing, of course, is that because of the fact, as I mentioned, that because of the information technology revolution and other kind of technological revolution, the state actually has lost the control on the narrative, on the values, on the information, which is now in your possession and in my possession, which the state can't control. I mean, whether it's the internet or whatever, that's what's happening. So you find, for example, that if you believe in something, you'll find some other person on the internet who believes something similar. And you bond together and you get exchange ideas together, and that's how it spreads. The other thing is that if the state is collapsed, the weapons are available. So you, and then you become internet savvy, so you know how to disrupt, how to sabotage, and you can do all that. So the point actually is, and that leads to security situations within countries. So it has two aspects. One is that that particular issue needs to be addressed, the threat of instability, which is the breeding ground for such kind of violence and violent thinking, how that breeding ground has to be neutralized. But second, also within the communities in the country where you find a certain situation where a certain kind of a security situation has arisen, that has been tackled at the local level. So it has to be a combination of both factors where everybody has to come together. But you can't isolate one from the other.
So just to conclude our conversation, and you also watched some of the Republican presidential hopefuls sharing their views. When we talk about dealing with ways to stop radicalization, and that radicalization which has its root in a particular ideology, then there is a potential that it leads to a sort of a narrative which is termed as Islamophobia. So taking into account the security concerns but not getting towards the other extreme. So that's a very delicate, fine balance. And do you see that pressure on the leaders here in America as you heard them?
Well, the pressure is everywhere. It's not just America. The pressure is in India as well. It's the UK, France, everywhere. All countries face this pressure. Pakistan faces the pressure too as well. So the pressure remains, but I was quite heartened by one of the candidates actually saying that, it's wrong to tar the Islamic Muslim community with the same brush. The extreme violent kind of thinking on the part of some people for whatever reasons, but everybody doesn't think that way, and gave the example of India. There's a huge Muslim population, but it is not prey to this kind of violent thinking or the violent action. Now there are reasons for that, and it all.
Allow me to interrupt, because there are many cases where they are prey to this kind of ideology. Of course, not majority of them, but they have traced. Some went to support ISIS, some came back, and recently also one guy was held in Jaipur itself who was propagating on social media the ideology of ISIS and recruiting, and he succeeded in recruiting also. And there's been other Twitter handlers who were supporting ISIS. So when we say that none of the Indian Muslims are sort of influenced, probably we are avoiding what is evident and visible.
Well, I would actually say this, that you'll always find some people. It is impossible to say that you will never find anybody. But, and it's something which, of course, because it is now emerging like a global phenomenon, therefore the Indian security agencies have to naturally keep an eye on this as a trend. But it is not a trend which actually threatens us or stabilizes us. It's something we have to keep a watch because of the fact that there is a global environment in which these such things actually incubate and they grow. But that's basically what it is, and that's basically what all governments need to do. The other thing is that the Indian community, whether the Muslim community or whether it is the Indian community overall, they actually have that kind of a, what should I say, a kind of an inclusiveness that actually works as a counter-narrative to some of these people who might be falling prey to some extremist kind of a thing which has been said. So the community cohesion is extremely important. And in fact, when the President Obama spoke, he mentioned that point, that community cohesion is very, very important. That is actually the bulwark which actually will work and stop that from happening. And I quoted to you the example from Gandhiji's life, when he said, when he was asked this question, when he went on his fast until death to stop the Hindu-Muslim killing in Calcutta in September 1947. And when he was asked this question by the governor of Bengal, Rajgopalachari, that by killing yourself, do you think you will change the heart of a criminal? And he said, I'm not aiming to change the heart of the criminal. I'm aiming to change the heart of those whom have sympathy. Because no terrorist can actually operate unless he has a support system, unless he or she has a support system. So if you actually can neutralize that support system by building a counter-narrative, and this was his way of building the counter-narrative, you can certainly isolate them and thereby neutralize them as a threat.
So wonderful. I appreciate Ambassador Sir for a wonderful thought-provoking book. And as we conclude this conversation, allow me to request you to share what are your views in terms of potentially what a reader is likely to get by reading your book, or what you expect them to get through the book.
Well, I think what I have done in this book really is to look at security issue not in a narrow or segmented sense. There is a lot of literature on that. What I have done basically is that I look at the complexity of the situation which creates a certain security paradigm for India. And that security paradigm is such that it requires a complex response. And that complexity response actually is engendered by the fact that today a lot of security threats arise from climate change, from pandemics, from instability, from what we said, the jihadist mentality. So these are not the challenges which actually are posed by a uniformed army pointing a gun at another army. These are very different kind of challenges. And therefore, when you look at this, the complexity of these challenges, you actually have to look at the complexity of response. And therefore, the response cannot be a knee-jerk response, and there's no silver bullet. It is actually the way we govern ourselves. So ultimately, the issue of providing security or looking at security issue really is ultimately all about us. How do we organize ourselves? How do we look at ourselves? And what kind of atmosphere through this kind of a community bonding we're able to create, which actually nullifies all threats. That's
wonderful. That's a great way of providing a composite response to such complex challenges. I really appreciate you having taken your time, focus, energy, having incorporated all your experiences, research, insight, and skill of thinking it through in the form of this wonderful book. May more and more readers find their way to this book. We are also displaying your contact numbers, so people may get in touch with you to learn more about the book and about your vision for a better and safe future. Thank you very much.
Well,
sir.
Thank you very much. So maybe you will give the details about the book so that people, and I'll be delighted if they want to get in touch with me to explain further what I've written. And thank you very much, and to your viewers for watching this. Thank you.
So appreciating his generosity in being open for all of us with lots of good wishes. This is Ashok Vyas.